All right. Well, welcome to another Bay Area Trails Confidential. I'm Rodney Paul. I'm your host. Hope everyone's staying as cool as possible right now. I'm doing my best. And we've got a great show for you tonight. Really excited about this one. The Ferry Building. We're going to be talking a lot about this great place in San Francisco that I think most of us know. Let me go ahead and get my slides going. Give me a second here. And we will get started. Oh, I also, of course, we've got the poll. So I'll give you guys another 10 seconds to complete the poll. And then I will go ahead and share our slides. But 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Results of the poll. We've got people connecting from around the Bay Area. That's always been our goal with this show, to bring us all together, even though we're in places that, it wouldn't be that easy for us to drive to a single place and meet for this meeting. And then we're going to talk about the Ferry Building and some of the things, its history we're going to talk a lot about, but it is also, of course, known for right now its great restaurants and stores. And I want to know which ones were most popular. Sadly, I see the Cowgirl Creamery is the most popular of them all. And unfortunately, that closed about, I don't know, a year ago. Is that right, Mark?
I think it's been gone a little longer than that, Rodney, but yeah, it's long gone.
I miss them. And this is Marc Igler, our guest tonight. I should introduce you. But first, I want to tell everyone that we're hosted by San Francisco City Guides. We're a nonprofit that does tours of San Francisco. We've been around since 1978. And we've got lots of great tours, including Mark's Ferry Building tour and the Haight-Ashbury tour that both he and I do. I've got the website with the show notes, which I have not gotten done yet, so don't bother going to that quite yet. We always like to start off by acknowledging that we are on the unceded land of Native American groups that were in California. The Ramaytush Ohlone were in the San Francisco area, and we're going to be talking about that tonight. And it's important to recognize that people from these nations and many others live in the Bay Area today. So we start by acknowledging them and their ancestors and their place on the land. This is what we're going to be talking about tonight. We are going to have some trail updates real quick. I want to take a few minutes to talk about Dianne Feinstein, our late senator. So we will talk about her, and her name is going to come up later on when we talk about the Ferry Building, which is going to be our main topic. We're going to really learn all kinds of. I learned so much talking to Mark about the Ferry Building. Then this actually turns out to be our 3rd anniversary, so we'll be talking a little bit about what the road ahead looks like for Bay Area Trails Confidential. We will have our contest, and you will have a chance to win Bay Trail map cards or the Ridge Trail guidebook if you win the contest. So that's all happening. Mark, I should really just welcome you to Bay Area Trails Confidential. How are you doing tonight?
Yeah, thank you, Rodney. I am doing great. Really looking forward to talking about my enthusiasm for the Ferry Building and sort of all things waterfront related in San Francisco.
And then we also have Lee Huo of the Bay Trail Project. And that's important because the Ferry Building's right on the Bay Trail. So how are you tonight, Lee?
It is. I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to learning more about the iconic Ferry Building.
Because isn't it like very close to the offices of the Bay Trail Project?
No, actually, we're located. We're a little bit further off in the what do you call that area? Recon Hill, I guess, is
okay.
This area, but we're walking distance from it.
Yeah, close enough, right?
Absolutely.
Trail updates, just a couple of quick things, and I will put this in the show notes, but there is a meeting on October 10th about what's called the West Oakland Link, which is going to connect the Bay Trail to the Mandela Parkway. And it's a very important link in the pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure in the East Bay. We've talked about it earlier on this show, but there will be a meeting on October 10th where you can learn more about that. And so when I send out my email after this show that has a link to the show notes, that'll tell you more about that. Also, the Ridge Trail folks are having their annual Ridge Trail Service Day on November the 4th. And if you go to their website, you can learn more about that. So that's kind of what I have. Lee, do you have any other trail updates?
No, not really. Where I think we're having maybe the main thing is that we are having a public meeting to talk about the West Link. I'm blanking on the exact time and date right now, but it's an online meeting to talk about connecting the Bay Trail to the Bay Bridge in the East Bay in West Oakland.
Yeah, I think that's that October 10th.
I think so. I'll find the information and put the link in there.
Okay. So I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about Dianne Feinstein. This program is hosted by San Francisco City Guides, and among the many things that she did that changed our city was she actually had the proclamation that made San Francisco City Guides the official docents of the city of San Francisco. She did so much else. She is, in my opinion, one of the great heroes of San Francisco history. And, many of us she first came to our awareness after the assassinations of George Moscone and Harvey Milk. And she really held the city together after that. And then she provided great leadership. And I'm not really here to talk about her politics, but just her as a hardworking public figure. And one of the things we've said on this show is that the things that we talk about, the public space that we cherish, it doesn't happen by magic. It takes hard work. And she was someone who was a hard worker. And among the many other things she did advocate for public space in San Francisco. So that's part of her legacy. And this is her lying in state today at City Hall. I stood in line and Sarah and I went and paid our respects to her. I'm wondering, Mark or Lee, if you have anything you want to add to that on Dianne Feinstein, or I'll look in chat and see if anybody throws any thoughts about that in the chat.
No, I think the main thing, everyone knows how much Dianne Feinstein's done for California and San Francisco in particular, since she's from there. I just always remember as a child that she had a large part in saving the cable cars, which I think was something that's a legacy that we did really need to preserve at the time. And that's just one minor thing out of the many things that she's done.
Yeah, the city is a very transformed place as a result of her leadership. So
I also
go ahead, Mark.
I also think that her role in the formation of City Guides was even a little more personal than you mentioned, Rodney. I think she actually came over to the library herself after the Milk Moscone killings and wanted to start an outreach program where people could learn about San Francisco. So I think it was really almost her instigation rather than just her sort of signing a proclamation. I think she was pretty hands-on in getting us going.
Yeah, it's just amazing all she got done. Just a tireless worker on our behalf. So we remember Dianne Feinstein and thank her for her amazing example of public service. But let's move on. Let's talk about the Ferry Building. It is, Mark, I believe 125 years. Is it next year that we mark that anniversary?
It is this year itself.
This year.
Yeah, the building was completed in 1898. And so actually all year they've been having little celebrations at the Ferry Building to commemorate a century and a quarter.
So it's kind of exciting. So Mark, you're a guide at City Guides of the Ferry Building. You do, how long is that tour? How long does that tour last?
I do, yeah. I'm one of about 12 to 15 guides who handle the Ferry Building. And the tour itself is about an hour. So it's sort of a nice compact tour. And we sort of, at least with my tour, we start out at the building right at the front steps and talk a little bit there. And then we walk across the street so we get a better view and sort of, mosey around over there for a little bit and then come back and spend a little time inside the building and then a little bit of time on the back side of the building. And then finally, we end up in what is called the Grand Nave, which is the whole second floor of the building, which is sort of off limits to the public these days. You can get in there if you're friendly to the guards. But it is really kind of a special place up there. It looks really cool up there. If you ever get the chance to sort of walk up and kind of sweet talk your way past the guard.
Yeah, and we do have a picture of that up there, so we'll get to that. But let's talk about the origin story of the Ferry Building. So, what was behind the effort to build it, and how long did it take to bring it to fruition?
Yeah, so I'll kind of give you the medium length version here. So the building we know as the Ferry Building today is really the second of San Francisco's ferry buildings. The first one was built just a couple hundred yards north on the Embarcadero, about where Pier 1 is these days. And it was sort of thrown together in the early 1870s and really wasn't much more than a large wooden shed, perfectly fine for bringing goods and materials into San Francisco. But if you were, coming to San Francisco for the first time, it didn't have a whole lot of charm. And so the city sort of knew that they needed to up their game once we got into the mid 1880s. And so the first thing they did was they floated a bond measure for all of $600,000. And it barely squeaked by. It was actually a statewide vote. And it squeaked by about 800 votes. But that did provide the city with the money to get things going. And order of business number one was to hire an architect. And the architect of the building was this sort of young hotshot architect out of New York City named Arthur Page Brown. And Arthur Page Brown had been in San Francisco for a couple of years and had gotten a few choice commissions from the Crocker family. That's Charles Crocker, one of the big four of the Transcontinental Railroad. So, Arthur Page Brown is in pretty good company. So he gets hired by the city and starts designing the building. And he gets done with his designs, and then they start construction around 1892. And then Arthur Page Brown dies. He died at age 36, and he died in one of those ways that sort of nobody dies anymore. Runaway horse. He was sitting in his buggy, and his horse got spooked and took off and ran into a bridge abutment. And no more Arthur Page Brown. Fortunately, he did have a couple of pretty good assistants who helped with the construction of the building. And they got it done in 1898. And one sort of interesting thing, kind of little fun fact about the building itself. Am I rambling a little too much here, Rodney?
No, this is good. Yeah, I want you. You're going to talk about the tower, right?
Yeah, I will. I will talk about the tower. Yeah. Do we want to talk about the tower now?
No, go. Say what you were going to say.
Okay, I was actually gonna talk about sort of the foundation of the building. When Arthur Page Brown designed it, he knew it had to be a building that was built over water. And while there's certainly been buildings that had been built over water before, each of them sort of has its own special circumstances. And so the foundation that he came up with is, if you were to sort of be able to get under the building these days and go underwater, what you would essentially see is sort of a forest of pine trees that are holding up the building. What Arthur Page Brown did is he sent work crews up to Oregon in the early 1890s to cut down pine trees. And they wound up cutting down about 8,000 of them. And they brought the trunks back to San Francisco. And he wanted pine because number one, there was a lot of it up there in Oregon. But number two, it grows really, really straight. And he needed logs that were at least 80 feet long. And then he brought them back to San Francisco, and they kind of grouped them together in sort of groups of maybe 12 or 15 logs, binded them together with an iron belt, and then sunk them into the bay all the way down as far as they could go.
So those are like pilings. They're vertical,
like pilings, right? Exactly. And the pine, it apparently absorbs salt water very quickly. So it gets waterlogged real quickly, but in the process, it becomes very, very strong, and it won't corrode, but it will sway a little bit. And so it's, that foundation is still down there today. Earlier this year, they had a big barge in the back of the Ferry Building, and I finally went up to the guys on the barge and asked them what they were doing, and they were checking out the foundation just to make sure it was solid, and still is.
125 years later, that those pine trees are doing okay.
Exactly.
That's extraordinary. So let's talk about the tower, because I know there's some different ideas of like what the inspiration for that tower was, and what do you know about that, Mark?
So the clock tower, of course, is the sort of the main feature of the building itself. And Arthur Page Brown, when he designed it, he always used to say that he designed it after the one you see on the left there, and that is a very old tower. I think it dates to the 13th century in Seville, Spain. But those who really look at our tower in San Francisco will find much more similarity to the one you see on the right, which is the tower of the second Madison Square Garden in New York City, which I think was demolished in 1925. But really the resemblance is quite striking, and it's I don't think any coincidence that the architectural firm that Arthur Page Brown worked for in New York City before he came to San Francisco was the firm that designed that tower at Madison Square Garden. So I tend to think he just sort of grabbed those designs and maybe did a few little tweaks here in San Francisco, but wanted the building to have a little bit of European panache. And so he always said he designed it after the one in Seville, Spain. But you can see that it's got the clock on it, and it's got the clock on all four sides. And the clock right now, as some of you may know, if you live in San Francisco, is all covered up. The clock tower is all covered up. They're doing some repair work and some repainting of the tower itself. But a couple little things about the clock tower. It does chime twice a day. Twice an hour, at the top of the hour and the bottom of the hour. And the chimes that you hear, it might be nice to think there are little men who sort of scurry up there twice a day and ring a big old bell. But it is in fact a CD, and has been a CD for a long time. And it is actually a CD of the chimes of Big Ben in London. So we're hearing sort of the London chimes rather than anything that's unique to San Francisco. Also on really windy days, sometimes the hands of the clock will get blown all over the place. And in that case, little men do have to scurry up the tower the next day and sort of readjust them to the right time.
So don't count on that for giving you accurate time on windy days. It's sort of like that clock in the Haight-Ashbury, that also is only correct twice a day.
Exactly, the 420.
For a different reason. Someone asked about this video that we showed. I'll show it a little bit of it again. And someone asked if this is available online. The answer is yes. This is on YouTube. And it was, Mark, I believe it was done in just a few days before the earthquake and the fire. So
I think it was done 4 days before the earthquake.
Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary. And this is actually just a snippet. The whole thing's like 11 minutes long, going all the way down Market Street. And you can just see, people complain about traffic in San Francisco today. And I don't know what it was like to be a bicyclist at this time, but it's pretty chaotic. But let's talk about the earthquake and fire, because that's kind of like, a big part of any San Francisco story that covers that period. So this is one of the few buildings that survived the fire. And it obviously took a lot of effort to save it from destruction. Why was doing that so important? And what did they have to do?
So, if you know about the earthquake and fire, you know that pretty much everything from Van Ness down to the waterfront was destroyed. But the Ferry Building is still standing. And we really credit that these days to the effort of one person. There was a Navy captain by the name of Frederick Freeman, who operated sort of a small flotilla of boats in the bay. And these were usually little fire boats that were used to sort of put out little fires that would break out on the piers from time to time. It was a very hard-working port, and little fires would break out, and so they needed fire boats. But when the big fire broke out on day one of the earthquake and fire, this is a picture we're looking at here, by the way, taken from the clock tower, looking down Market Street, so you can just see the devastation. But Frederick Freeman really swung into action when he saw San Francisco burning, and he knew that San Francisco was going to need its port if it was going to recover. And he knew there were three buildings in particular that needed to be saved right down there at the foot of Market. He knew we would need the Ferry Building to bring rescue crews in and out and material in and out. He knew we'd need the building. And there's a stone building next to the Ferry Building these days. Some of you might know it, just to the south. And that building is still there. That used to be the original postal facility in San Francisco, where the packages would come in through that building. He knew we'd need that one too. And then next to that was the old Mission Street Hospital, and he knew we'd need that. So Frederick Freeman really sort of took charge and made sure that the whole area down there was well soaked. He just used his fireboats to suck bay water up and sprayed down everything for 3.5 days. And it's really a remarkable story. It is said, probably more apocryphally than anything else, but it is said that after those 3.5 days, they literally had to pry his fingers off of the fire hose. He had been holding that hose for so long that he just sort of frozen in place. So we do sort of credit him for saving the building. The building did suffer a little bit of damage. You can see it here. The clock tower lost a little bit of the of its covering. But no part of the building burned, and it was back and functioning, within a week or so, if not sooner.
So Frederick Freeman, one of the great heroes of San Francisco history, not to be confused with Freddie Freeman, one of the villainous players for the Los Angeles Dodgers.
Exactly. Yeah.
But is there any kind of memorial to Frederick Freeman in San Francisco?
I've never been able to find one. It's really sort of a sad story with Frederick Freeman. What he did in saving the Ferry Building and much of the waterfront, he did so because he was disobeying an order. One of the higher ups wanted him to not focus on the waterfront, but wanted him to sail down to Monterey to get troops to come to San Francisco. And he apparently said, screw that, I'm staying where I think it's most important. And because of that, he was, I believe, dishonorably discharged and lived quite a bit of his life sort of in obscurity and shame afterwards, until finally, towards the end of his life, one of his former officers found him and got his reputation restored. But it's really sort of a sad story, and considering his contribution to San Francisco.
Yeah. Let's talk about kind of the heyday of the Ferry Building. Like here's an extraordinary photograph of the building in 1915 with, I guess it snowed or something. But
it snowed, yeah.
But this is kind of a picture from its heyday. And what are we looking at here, Mark?
So yeah, after the earthquake really brought on the heyday of the Ferry Building from 1908 until the mid 30s, was when the Ferry Building was really cranking. If you wanted to come to San Francisco, certainly in the early days, but even later, you had to come by ship. And particularly if you're coming from the other side of the bay, you had to come by ship. And so there were an awful lot of ferries that worked the bay. And there was 1920s, 1930s were huge decades for the ferry building. I think they reached it at one point, the ferry building was the second busiest transit terminal in the world, just behind Charing Cross in London, the railroad station. And, at its peak for at least a few decades, they had, 50,000, 75,000 people a day coming in and out of the ferry building. And, to give you some comparison, that is actually quite a bit more than go through San Francisco International Airport on any given day. And here they were doing it all in and out of one building rather than an entire airport. So it was really the focal point of the port. And it was, it was a vital, you can see there in that picture that this is probably from the 20s or the 30s, where they've got what would we call it? The pedestrian walkway that goes across the Embarcadero there. And actually, you don't see it, but there's actually a tunnel for car traffic that it goes under the what is the Embarcadero these days. You would pick up the tunnel back around Folsom, and then it would open up again down near Broadway, and it kept a lot of car traffic from being in front of the bay.
Yeah, tell us, like, this pedestrian walkway is taking people to the second floor of the building, and you told me, like, well, this is something a lot of people I don't think know, that the passengers went through the second floor, not the ground floor like we do today. So tell us more about what it would be like to get a ferry from the ferry building at that time.
Yeah, exactly. So the general sort of way that you would work the building is, if you were approaching the building from the San Francisco side, you would buy your ticket down at the ground floor under those arches that you see. And then you would buy your ticket there. And if you had any luggage or anything that needed to be transported, you would give it up right there. And then they bring it into that ground floor area. That whole ground floor area that we know is sort of this, nice marketplace these days, was totally off limits to the public back in the day. The main floor that you would use as a passenger was the second floor. So you'd buy your ticket, and then you'd go up one of the stairways up to the big mezzanine on the second floor. And then you would wait there until your ferry came in, and then you would go out the back, and you would enter your ferry. You'd go out on these big, long, Y-shaped piers, and you would get in your boat. And then if you were coming back to San Francisco, you would come out of your ferry, and you would then walk through the second floor mezzanine, and then you would walk over onto the other side of Embarcadero if that's the way you were going.
Yeah, this reminds me so much of like a gate in an airport now, that you were indoors until you got onto the ferry boat.
Yep.
Unlike what you do today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And look how huge these ferry boats are. I think we've got some pictures of some of the boats. The clam.
These were big. They would carry, I think the biggest one to serve the ferry building would hold up to 2,500 people. So they were, they carried a lot of people. And, they, at its peak, there were about 340 comings and goings a day from the back of the ferry building. That's a boat leaving or arriving about every 5 minutes. So it was busy back there.
So what are some lesser known stories of the ferry building that you like to tell on your tours? Things that most people don't know.
Yeah, well, let's see.
Actually, here's you want to tell us about this picture? Because
tell you about this one. So the dining areas in these ferry boats were always very popular. You would come over, the ferry boats were used by commuters. And so you would usually be on the same boat every day, coming to the city and then leaving it. And, if you were coming over in the morning and you needed breakfast, you were joined by an awful lot of people who needed breakfast, and they would cram you in. And they had to be very efficient. The wait staff on the ferry boats had to be very efficient. If you were coming over from Oakland, that was about an 18-minute ride. And you can imagine, you got to get in there, find a seat, you got to order your food, you got to eat your food, you got to pay for your food. The Sunbeam Corporation, back around 1910 or so, designed a special toaster for ferry boats, and it was a toaster that could toast 16 slices of bread at once, and that I think helped out the wait staff quite a bit in sort of getting something in everybody's mouth before they kind of got their main dish. And then going back, they served a full dinner. I think you had the menu up there earlier, Rodney, and they've got pot roast going and kidney, and this menu you see, I think, is from the early 30s. And I remember one of my daughters was looking at this menu a little while ago, and she said, "Wow, this is really expensive," not knowing that those are, of course, pennies rather than dollars. But yeah, it was kind of cool. I also like telling on my tours about sort of life aboard the ships and sort of the ferry boat captains. These captains were all men. I think there was one famous female captain, but they were generally men with big egos, thought very highly of themselves. And a lot of times this was back in the day before sonar and radar. And so, you going out on San Francisco Bay, it was busy, as is. But if you, throw in the element of fog, you really kind of need to know what you're doing out there. And they use this complex system of sounds and lights out there on the bay that would tell a boat captain where he or she was in relation to other boats and where they were on the bay. But I always like telling the story of the ferry boat captains, and these guys were very competitive. And there was a rule out on San Francisco Bay for ferry boat captains. And the rule was there's no racing on San Francisco Bay. But we all know that they did race because there was a famous saying among ferry boat captains that went like this: "There's no racing on San Francisco Bay. If you get caught racing, you're going to be fined $10. And if you lost the race, it's going to be 20. So we know they raced out there. I also like telling the story of the only major accident on the bay, where there's actually a ferry boat at the bottom of the bay. And it's the story of a ferry boat called the San Rafael, which was a smaller ferry boat, held about 500 people. But the story with it is that it left the Ferry Building on a foggy night in November 1901. It was headed for, I believe, Larkspur, one of the northern destinations up there. And it was just on the other side of Alcatraz, again, heavy fog. And out of nowhere from the fog came another ferry boat heading right at it. And this was a ferry boat called the Sausalito, a much newer, much bigger ferry boat. The San Rafael itself was carrying 250 people, and it got T-boned. It got just totally T-boned. It started taking on water very quickly. The crews from both of the boats, though, swung into action very quickly and dropped wooden planks between the two. And of those 250 people on the San Rafael, 247 of them made it safely over to the Sausalito. 3 people either fell in the water or we don't know exactly what happened to the 3. But the loss of life was only 3. There was one other loss of life, and that was a horse by the name of Old Dick. This is back in 1901, before automobiles, and people would bring their horses on the boats. And Old Dick just would not go across one of the wooden planks. They apparently tried his best to push him, and he just wouldn't go. it's almost like, he was going to, go down with the ship. And then what's also weird is that, so the ship goes down, and then we lose it. We didn't know where the San Rafael was on the bottom of the bay for 20 years. And it was in the 1920s when a liner was coming into San Francisco Bay, and it just happened to be dragging its anchor, and it hooked a big piece of the San Rafael and pulled it up. Wow. So we now know where it is. It turns out it's about a half a mile from where it originally sunk. The currents down there at the bottom of the bay are very strong, and they just sort of carried the boat along and then plopped it down eventually. So it's still down there. What's also a little freaky to think about is there's one other sinking of a ferry boat. And this was a ferry boat called the Golden City, and it went down in 1925. And the thing about it, though, is that it was carrying not passengers, but it was carrying a load of cars. And so it's a little creepy to think down there at the bottom of the bay, there is another ferry boat, and there are a whole bunch of 1920s era cars, most likely still on it. So those are the two major accidents we had with ferry boats out on the bay.
Well, I wouldn't lose my horse. I would lose my bicycle if something like that happened. And you really can't have that. Let's talk about the decline of the ferry building. What leads to the decline, and what happens to this beloved building during its kind of dreary years of being kind of forgotten and overlooked?
Yeah, so really two things, and they're about 20 years apart. I always ask people who go on my tour, what do you think happened in 1936 that almost led to the death of the ferry building? And we're at a point in the tour where we can actually see the Bay Bridge. And usually nobody says anything. And then I say, you can see it from here, what I'm talking about. And then somebody usually gets the bridge. So when the Bay Bridge was built in 36 and the Golden Gate, of course, in 37, ferry service plummeted. You no longer needed to wait on a ferry boat schedule to come across the bay. And the whole bottom deck of the Bay Bridge, that was rail until I think the 1960s. So you'd come across by car, you could come across by train. So that was sort of the first death blow to the ferry building. After that, ferry service very rapidly dwindled. And then it totally was eliminated in 1958. And Rodney, can you tell us what happened in San Francisco in 1958?
Well, I think we're talking about this, aren't we?
We are. Yeah, the Embarcadero
terrible
Freeway.
Embarcadero Freeway. Cannot say enough bad things about it. So this is this was like everyone thought these highways were just going to be great for everybody. And this is one thing actually you and I talk about, I think, on the Haight-Ashbury tour, because there was going to be a highway through the Haight-Ashbury.
Panhandle Freeway, yeah.
But tell us, so what did the Embarcadero Freeway do to the ferry building?
Yeah, so you see it right there. And, the big thing that it did is by this time, there were no ferry boats anyway. But what it did is it really blocked off not only the ferry building, but that entire stretch of the waterfront. It came off of the 80 and went all the way down the Embarcadero till about Broadway. And the whole waterfront was now behind a double-decker freeway. And, things became pretty slummy down there for a long time. Some of you may remember, you didn't really go down there during the 60s, 70s, even into the 80s. Ferry building, meanwhile, was being carved up. They didn't know what to do with it. It sort of became second and third tier office buildings, office space for quite a while. And things were looking very, very grim. During those years, there was a lot of talk about tearing it down and building something new down there. But then, of course, 1989, October of 89 came along. And and the big earthquake, Loma Prieta earthquake. And of course, that badly damaged the Embarcadero Freeway. And that brought on, of course, a big debate in San Francisco. I think there were eventually 3 public votes before the final vote, which was to actually tear down the freeway.
Yeah, and this is probably a good place to jump in and say, even before the '89 earthquake, Dianne Feinstein was advocating for that highway to be torn down. So there was a ballot initiative that she strongly supported to take it down and restore the access to the building without this terrible freeway in the middle.
Yeah, and it was, it was a tough call in San Francisco. People were very divided over that freeway. There were, particularly North Beach, Chinatown really liked it, the politics there, because it dumped people right into that area. So it was not a slam dunk. It was, it was something that was fought over quite a bit before Feinstein and the anti-freeway people finally, won that battle.
In Mother Nature kind of got the biggest vote on all that. Tell us about this. What are we looking at here, Mark?
So yeah, this is one of the very ambitious drawings of one proposal, what to do with the San Francisco waterfront. I think this was actually in the 40s or 50s. And this was some sort of World Trade Center type of proposal that was put forth. I don't think this one ever got much traction, other than the drawing itself is, rather, curious to look at. But there were a lot of different proposals back then over what we should do with the area around the Ferry Building, and they always talked about keeping the Ferry Building, but really kind of building, a huge fortress around it of some sort.
Yeah. And the Ferry Building, I think, was even called the World Trade Center at one point.
Yeah, and there was some organization. There was I think a World Trade Center organization in San Francisco for a long time, and they were located down at the Ferry Building. I think they occupied that building just beyond the backside of the Ferry Building that's vacant these days.
So it really went through that terrible period. And then, how did they come to the current use of the building? We'll show some pictures of kind of what they imagined it could be, but tell us that whole story. How did it get transformed into what it is today?
Yeah, so it was in 1992 when the city decided, okay, we're going to tear down the freeway and we are going to reinvigorate the waterfront. And we want to make the Ferry Building sort of the centerpiece of that effort. So the Ferry Building was in pretty bad shape at that point. It had been, pretty well trashed. And it was going to require about $100 million to bring it back. It was also on the National Register of Historic Places, so that makes it, a little tricky to renovate a building that's on the register. But the city was talking $100 million, and I've always kind of liked what the city did. They didn't want to pay the $100 million. Who wants to do that? And so I don't know who it was, but they came up with the idea, let's float the idea out to the, investment community out there. Hey, if anybody will put up $100 million or a good chunk of $100 million, we will use that money to renovate the building. And in exchange, you will get a really long-term lease on all of the leasable space that will be created within the building. And so a company called, I believe, Hudson Pacific Properties stepped up and put up most of that money, and in exchange has I think a 60, 70-year lease on all the leasable space. That includes the whole marketplace down below, and very importantly, the second and third floor of the buildings. There's an awful lot, sort of a deceptively large amount of office space up there. And I think about 170,000 square feet. So it generates pretty good income. As far as I know, it is still fully leased up there. And I always like to end my tour in front of a window up there on the second floor. And I ask people to look through the window. And on the other side of the window, there's a wall. And on the wall, there's a logo, GV. And I ask everybody, what do you think GV is? And sometimes somebody gets it. It's Google Ventures. So it's the office of Google Ventures. And so that's sort of the type of tenant that they get up there at the Ferry Building. To this day, it's still considered a very prestigious address to say that you have your offices in the Ferry Building.
Yeah, I think that partnership they did with the business community, it reminds me of the solution for the San Francisco Giants, because the Giants, we were very close to leaving San Francisco, and they ended up being leased to the land on where Oracle Park is. And so it's a privately financed facility. The Giants borrowed the money and spent that money, $357 million themselves. So it's just another really creative way of, getting us a really great amenity for our city without having to come up with a lot of tax dollars.
And the renovation of the building itself was tricky. Again, it was pretty run down. The city wanted to bring in natural light from the old skylights up top. If you remember that old office picture you had, you can see that they dropped a nice little fluorescent lighting system down into that third floor rather than getting the natural light. So they had a lot of, it's sort of a false ceiling there. But, the building was in real bad shape. A lot of the arches that you kind of see in that picture right there, a lot of the arches in the building had crumbled, or in some cases had even been replaced with these sort of stainless steel window frames. And they wanted to restore those arches, but it was really delicate work. And they couldn't use masonry. And so for a lot of the arches that you see in the building, if you can kind of look at them along there, it's not brickwork these days. They actually used a type of styrofoam that is used in surfboard construction. But it's a really good job. You look at those bricks, those styrofoam bricks today, once you get up on that second floor, and you can't tell the difference. It's really good the way that they did it. They also tried to, of course, keep as many sort of authentic details as possible. One of my little favorites is right in the front of the building. Once you go inside in the main entrance down on the bottom floor, there's an old schedule board for departures and arrivals. And it's one of the old ones that they used to use. And it uses that what is called split flap technology. You probably remember the old, digital clocks from the 1970s and 80s. You'd turn it and all these little panels would go, click, 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 click. And so it uses that. And it's always kind of fun to sit there next to that schedule board. And because it goes off about every minute, it starts clicking like crazy. And everybody who's walking by just sort of stops and looks up and just sort of takes it in like they've never seen it before, because you got all these little panels clicking, and it's a live schedule board. It is it's accurate for the day's departures and arrivals.
That's really cool. I think it's a split panel clock that's used in the movie Groundhog Day. You see at the start of every day. So we should probably wrap this up, Mark. I think everyone needs to come on your tour and see all this stuff in person. But I know that there's a pretty exciting book coming out. So tell us about what you know about this book by John Kane.
There is, yes. So there have been two previous books on the Ferry Building. One of them, by the way, was written by a woman named Ann Hitz, who is one of the guides on our Ferry Building tour. She's somebody who you can come and take her tour. And then there was another one many years before by a lady named Nancy Olmsted. But this is, a new one coming out next month. And you can see it's by John King, who's the architectural critic for the San Francisco Chronicle. And he's been hard at work on this book for many years. He's a big fan of the Ferry Building. If you ever read his coverage, he's written a lot of stories on the Ferry Building in the last couple of years. And, there's always kind of a loving tone to his coverage, his writing. But he's coming out with Portal November 4th, I believe it is. I have pre-ordered it myself. And I'm really interested to find out what he comes up with. I'm sure there are a lot of old details that I don't know about. And I think he kind of looks at the Ferry Building in sort of a slightly greater context of transportation and San Francisco as a port. But the focus is primarily on the building and just sort of its role in San Francisco's growth down through the years.
Cool. Well, thanks for telling us all that, Mark. And Lee, I just want to ask you: do you have any thoughts on the Ferry Building being a transportation person, and it's right on the Bay Trail? What are your thoughts on the Ferry Building, Lee?
Well, I think there's the best thing about it these days is that it's a gathering place. To me, that's the thing that I work about the Bay Trail. It's about connecting people and places. And that's what the Ferry Building does these days, especially during those Saturday farmers markets, which are just insane if people have been out there.
Yep, you're right. It's a wonderful. It's like this is a story we can really feel good about in our city, in our region. That we had this great building, and it fell into disrepair, and it was ignored, and then people understood its importance and we've truly revitalized it. So it's a real, and it took a lot of hard work and a lot of money, but it's a big success.
And if you've seen it these days, of course, that the whole clock tower is covered up, and they're repainting it. It's sort of a every 20-year kind of spruce up of the Ferry Building, and that scaffolding and screening was supposed to come down in October this month. I don't know if it is, but you've also may have noticed that they're repainting the building, and they've repainted the building itself. It's kind of a muddy gray, which I think is a little unfortunate myself. If you've seen the Ferry Building in years past, it was kind of a pale concrete with almost kind of a bluish hue to it that really looked, I think, pretty distinctive. But San Francisco wanted to return it to the original. And so we're going to have it returned to us probably in the next month or two. And it's going to be kind of that muddy gray, which, again, I'm not a big supporter of, but, who am I?
It'll be nice to just have it not covered in scaffolding again.
Yep.
But Mark, thank you so much for telling us all about the Ferry Building and inspiring us to come on your tour. And in the show notes, I'll include information on that. How often is the tour given?
Yeah, we do the tour twice a week. We do it every Tuesday at noon and every Saturday at 10. Saturday can get pretty busy, like Lou said, with the farmers market going on. But 10 o'clock, you're usually there before the real crush. But then we do it Tuesday at lunchtime also. And again, it's about an hour. And just go on our website if you're interested, and you'll find my name, and you'll find a lot of other guides to choose from.
Well, people are saying really nice things about what you've shared with us, Mark, in chat. Also want to note there were a couple comments in chat that we didn't mention. Carl mentions that the World Trade Center was the second floor south end of the building in the 1990s. I actually had a friend who was he rented space there and said it was like one of the cheapest rental spaces for commercial property in the city. And I think Serena said that she used to work in that building. Funny thing is, Serena and I ran into each other a few weeks ago, right in front of the Ferry Building. So really interesting stuff. But we're going to move on now to our second topic, which is this is our third anniversary of Bay Area Trails Confidential. And we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about that, but these are all the places that we've covered over the past 3 years. We Lee, you and I started this thing in October of 2020, which was a very different time. And we've had a lot of people tune in over the years. But I do have to say that I'm going to need to make some changes to the show because it's just getting harder to get guests who, people have busy schedules, and sometimes saying the first Wednesday at 7:30, it's not working for everybody. And I'm going to actually change the show to be, it's not going to be on Zoom anymore. It's going to be on YouTube. We're going to do videos and put those out. And I think, Mark, we're going to do more things like you and I just did, where I'm going to find subject matter experts like yourself, maybe some other fellow city guides, and start talking more about that stuff. But we are going to continue the show. We're just going to continue it in a different form. So it won't continue to be the first Wednesday of each month at 7:30 p.m. The plan is for me to create videos with other guests and post those probably on a monthly basis. And we're gonna lose some of the interactive quality of this, but we'll be able to do a little more editing, and I think we'll be able to get more guests, which is the most important thing. I do want to say we've just had so many really loyal audience members, and I don't want to mention any names, but if I am going to mention a name, I need to mention Paco, because Paco has come on almost every single one of these shows. So Paco, I hope you know I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate all the other folks out there. Again, I'm not going to mention names, but I know who you are, and I've made a lot of friends through this show, and my hope is that that's going to continue. We're just going to have a little bit of a different format. And we're going to do in-person events. It's going to give me more time to be able to put together in-person events. They really, truly are going to happen. Lee, do you want to share any thoughts on that?
Well, I just want to say, Rodney, I can't tell you how much I personally appreciated all of the work that you put into putting these shows to put it out in front of people. You did it during time, I think, when we all really needed it. It was a very different time, and having this type of show to be able to inspire people and continue hope and get people outside in a different way was so important. But as everything goes, evolution continues, and it's all, like you said, it's all about trying to give people ideas and inspire them to go out. And with the things changing these days, where I think people are spending more time outside, I think it's more important to give them their own opportunities to find this information and to go do things.
Yeah, and maybe we'll be doing some of those things together. I am really proud that we've really covered the entire Bay Area, because it was always the premise of this show that we've got the Bay Trail, we've got the Ridge Trail. They go all over the Bay Area. You might think you know the entire Bay Trail based on the places near you, but I challenge people. I don't think that's true. I think if you love the sections of the Bay Trail, like, say, the Ferry Building, the Embarcadero, you're still going to want to go over to Oakland and see places like Jack London Square, Brooklyn Basin. You're going to want to go up to Marin County, to places like Hamilton, the South Bay, Alviso, the Coyote Hills Regional Park. So many great places in the Bay Area, and they're not all the same. Mark, I know you live on the peninsula, and is it Bear Island is one of my favorite places down there. There's a lot of cool stuff on the peninsula.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we are going to move on now to our contest. We've been doing the contest every month, and we award a set of Bay Trail map cards or the Ridge Trail guide. And we always, Serena Seaton, who's in the audience tonight, she's the one who sends the Bay Trail map cards. I would let her pick a favorite place in the Bay Area. And she picked this one, the Windy Hill Open Space Preserve, which is on the peninsula. Maybe not that far from you, Mark. Do you know it?
I do. It's Palo Alto, Los Altos Hills area, I believe.
Yep. And I suppose it's kind of windy, which would be really nice tonight since it's so hot. But thank you, Serena, for selecting that. And you do, if you win this contest, you get the Ridge Trail guidebook, which is really great, or you get the Bay Trail map cards. Those are both fabulous things. And here's the contest. Here's the trivia. The first person who can answer this or gets closest is going to win. And the question is, how many Bay Bay Area Trail Confidential shows. It was formerly known as Bay Trail Confidential. Well, how many total shows have we done in 3 years? Put a number in the chat, and if I see the correct number, I will award the, you'll get a choice of one of those two things. I see a bunch of numbers. I am not yet seeing the correct number. I guess keep on guessing. This is kind of fun. So everyone's seeing these numbers, right? I'm seeing some folks are getting kind of close. No one's nailed it. Figure out what number hasn't been, the number that you might think is 0 yet. 100, not quite. I'd be really tired if I'd done 100 of these shows, See numbers that are getting kind of in the ballpark. I would hate to have nobody win this prize, All right, Mike and Fran win. It's 31 shows. We've done 31 shows in 3 years. Kind of hard to believe. Mike and Fran, I think I know how to get a hold of you, and you will have to think about whether you want actually, you could maybe we'll even let you unmute. I'm going to change it so you guys can now unmute. And if Mike and Fran want to unmute and tell us which they would prefer, the Bay Trail map cards or the Ridge Trail guidebook. There's no wrong answer here.
Yes, we want cards.
You want the cards? What do you think, Lee? That's a pretty good choice, right?
Absolutely.
I love them both, but I maybe slightly love my Bay Trail map cards more. So good. Glad you guys won. Yeah. And now I'm going to play our theme song that we always end with, Happy Trails. Happy trails to you. We're still going to do Happy Trails at the end of these shows. Until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling until then. Who cares about the clouds if we're together? Just sing a song and bring the sunny weather. Happy trails to you until we meet again. Until we meet again. So I want to thank Midnight Kitchen and Jason Myers, who sings that. I want to thank my wife, Sarah, who's always very helpful with this program. Mark, thank you. You were a great guest. Everyone really loved hearing all about the Ferry Building. Lee, as always, really appreciate you. And now's the time when folks can, we do want to mention our friends, Midnight Kitchen, will be playing at the Kensington Farmers Market this Sunday. That's always fun. And I do have show notes for the episode. I will at least have them on my website within the next 24 hours or so. But now's the time for any questions or sharing your own experiences. So if anybody wants to unmute.
It's just so enlightening, Rodney.
Thanks,
But
Paco.
on Monday, we're going to do art viewing adventures.
This is true. The art viewing adventures
and Richie's program also.
And then Richie Unterberger is going to do his rock history program. So that's all continuing.
Like the 60s songs.
60s songs, yep. Boomer music. Serena, I see you have your hand raised. Go ahead, Serena.
Yeah, I have a question, Rodney. Great images. And I was wondering, there was one that had names on a map. And I was wondering if that had to do with boats in the bay, like, the area that was filled in. The Bayfill.
Oh yeah, let's see if I can find that. So, were we looking at this one?
No, it was a picture of a map, and it showed like the line where the bay was.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, what are those names? I can barely read them on my screen.
These are like boats that were found.
Oh, cool.
When they were like excavating buildings. So here's the Ferry Building, and there's a boat very close to there. Is Mark still with us, or do we lose him?
No, I'm still here.
Yeah, Mark, why don't you tell us about this?
Yes, so the bay was filled in starting in 1850, 1851, and you can sort of see the original shoreline there. And then all that area was filled in with pretty much anything they could find back then. And there were an awful lot of abandoned ships in the harbor. They were, typically what would happen back then is a boat would come into San Francisco Bay carrying a bunch of 49ers, and the boat would dock, and all the passengers would get off and head for the gold fields, as would the crew. And so these ships were just left there abandoned in the mud. And I think there were about 500 abandoned ships in the harbor. And a lot of them were broken down and were used to fill in the bay. And you can see them. These are the ones we know about, are the little orange oblong shapes. And then you can see there are four large big orange circles. And those are also ships, but those are sites where we've done a little bit of an archaeological dig, and know a little bit more than the other ones. And collectively, this is known as San Francisco's ghost fleet of ships. They're all down there, and we seem to find a new one maybe every decade or so when they're digging a foundation, and usually they will stop work and check it out a little bit. And usually, it's just an old abandoned ship. There's nothing real special about it, and they just sort of keep going. The one you see down there near the Ferry Building, that's kind of an interesting story. That was a ship called the Rome, and it came into San Francisco Harbor in 1851 and was abandoned, and then was buried in the bay. And then we forgot about it for about 140 years until they were digging a subway coming off a market going down the Embarcadero, and they ran right into the hull of the Rome, and couldn't really bring it up, no reason to bring it up. And so they just, the subway to this day goes right through the hull of the Rome. You'd never know it, but it does.
Is there some place I can look at this online?
You can. Are you interested in sort of the bigger picture of the ghost fleet? Or
yeah, I just want to look a little closer, like not on my screen, so I can see like the names and such.
I would just Google San Francisco's ghost fleet, and
Perfect.
it's very well documented,
It's
and
very
there's an
cool.
awful lot of material on it. It's kind of cool, really.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'll try to put that on the show notes page if I can find the link.
Yeah. It is pretty cool when they find one of them, though. I remember when I was working the financial district a little bit over 20 years ago, and they were building a new skyscraper, and they dug into the foundation at, I think it was at Sampson and Clay. They found one. So they actually cut, usually when they do those type of work, they board up the entire block, but they cut little holes in it so that people could actually take a peek inside and look at the boat that they actually found in there. They did exactly what Mark said. They stopped work, and they sent some archaeologists in there, and they took some pictures and documented it. And then after they did that, I think it took a week or so, they just kept going. But it was kind of cool to be able to peek in and actually see a bit of history.
I think the office building, if I'm thinking of the office building at Sansom and Clay, may have some of the artifacts in its lobby. I remember seeing that. If it's the same office building that has the rooftop garden, which is also really amazing, I'll have to. So I'm not 100% sure that that's correct, but I know there's a building that has.
I know the one you're talking about. I don't think that's the same one, but they did find another one there, which is why they have the artifacts there.
Okay, maybe that's what it is. Very cool. Great question, Serena. Thank you. Other questions or comments?
Great program today. Thanks, Rodney.
Thank you, Paco. Thanks for being such a loyal audience member all these years now.
And Nikki is hosting for our art viewing adventures on Monday.
We have got a great program on for that too. It's going to be Latino heritage. We've got a muralist from the Mission District who's going to be talking to us about that. So that's going to be fun. Well, if there's nothing else out there, hope everyone stays cool. And as I always say, happy trails. Hope you guys get out there on the Bay Trail, the Ridge Trail, the San Francisco Crosstown Trail, all these great places. But I wish everyone well. Have a happy October. So good night, everybody.
Thank
Good
you,
night,
Rodney.
everyone.
Good
Thanks,
night.
Rodney.
Thank you.